Good evening. Let us continue. Do you remember the story? The one where you placed your figurines into the box and tried to save a world. After you delivered the weapons and equipment, a sprite named Lilith returned with terrible news. She had found the demon's true stronghold. Tonight, this is where the story continues. The intelligence Lilith brought back fell like an icy cascade, dousing the fragile spark of hope that had only just ignited in Irach. The demon's main lair lay upon the ruins of the corrupted elven high court, a place now known as the Throne of Agony. There, the Abyssal Lord, the Whisperer of Pain, was conducting a ritual of immense scale. Lilith's reconnaissance team had managed to get dangerously close. What they saw was a pillar of dark crimson light piercing the heavens. What they heard was the endless residue of countless souls fused together, their remains howling without end. From fragmented elven records and lingering magical resonance, Lilith concluded the ritual was already complete. What came next would be the Dark Mirror continent itself being dragged wholesale into the abyss, unextinguished, to become the Pain Lord's eternal collection, a trophy, a toy. Sarah remained silent in the command chamber for a long time. Torchlight on the stone walls cast the shadow of his tightly furrowed brow, the scar across his face, splitting the silhouette like a black fissure. The dwarven chieftain slammed his fist against the table, metal wires braided into his beard clinking angrily. Lilith lowered her head. The notches along her shoulder and ear trembled faintly. There was no choice, no retreat. To remain entrenched in Irach meant death. To strike first, to pierce straight into the heart of the enemy, was the only sliver of possibility left. Then we fight. Sarah finally spoke, his voice hoarse, yet immovable. Gather everyone who can still hold a weapon, no rear guard. Either we win or we die together clean and free. The order was given. Irach began its final, tragic mobilization. Artisans worked without rest, repairing weapons, forging as many sword cores as they could, hammering together crude protective armor. Women and elders prepared ration bars, gathered every usable scrap of cloth to bind wounds. Children were escorted into the deepest, strongest underground vaults, guarded by the oldest veterans. If the front failed, the powder beneath the vault would be ignited. No captives. The entire city breathed an air that felt almost religious, a fusion of fervor and despair. At the center of the plaza, the remnants of the mech you had sent, along with the 2 surviving plastic soldiers, were elevated like sacred relics. Around them, people placed offerings of their own. A stone polished smooth by hand, a bundle of dried wildflowers, a small piece of black bread someone could not bear to eat. Sarah stood upon the high platform to deliver the final address. He wore no ceremonial attire, only the pale gold exoskeleton you had given him, still stained with blood and soot that would never fully wash away. In his hand was a reforged blade, its edge reflecting a cold glimmer beneath the dim sky. Warriors, his voice echoed across the plaza through a crude amplification spell. Before us lies the abyss. Behind us, our children. We have no retreat, but we are not alone. He raised his sword, pointing toward you. There is a silent God, a God who answers with steel and miracles. He has been watching us. He gave us blades. He gave us armor. He gave us giants. And now it is time for us to swing the final sword. For him, for ourselves, for whatever tomorrow we may yet see. We do not beg the gods for mercy, Sarah continued, his voice suddenly rising, raw rasping cutting through the air. We tell those who would drag us into hell, we refuse. We refuse. The roar that erupted from 5,000 throats was like a breaking sea, dwarven thunder, human cries, elven battle shrieks. They merged into a visible wave of sound that tore upward into the ash-grey clouds. This was no longer prayer. It was the purest emotion 5,000 burning souls could release resolve, rage defiance, and a faint glimmer born from choosing death over submission. That torrent slammed directly into your consciousness. You were seated at your workbench, rushing to fabricate explosive units with a 3D printer. You had carefully extracted powder from novelty fireworks, packing it into printed, ribbon-shaped needle housings. The moment the wave hit, you were unprepared. The tweezers fell from your fingers. You jerked backward, slamming into the chair. A violent ringing filled your ears, as if 10,000 bees were roaring inside your skull. Your vision blurred. Blood vessels at your temples throbbed violently, as though about to burst. You clutched the edge of the desk, fingernails digging into the wood, knuckles blanching white. This was not pain. It was overload. Your channel of belief had never carried such concentrated emotion, so fierce, so unified. For a fleeting moment, your awareness was dragged into that plaza. You felt the ground trembling beneath your feet. You smelled sweat, blood, rust, and despair burning. You saw every face young and old alike, each one already prepared to die. Then the pressure slowly faded. What remained was a hollow emptiness and a bone-deep exhaustion. You gasped for air. Cold sweat soaked through your clothes. You knew they were truly leaving now, marching toward a battle with almost no chance of survival. You looked down at the scattered equipment on your workbench. A few engineering tanks built on RC car chassis, several crude flight wings sized for elves, dozens of hand-packed explosive units. Against an abyssal lord, their impact would be negligible. Your gaze drifted past these makeshift creations to the acrylic display case covering the far wall of the room. At the top shelf, in the brightest light, sat a pristine white box. No patterns, no artwork, only a single line of elegant gold lettering. Seraphy Collector's Edition, Archangel Michael number 037. You had waited an entire winter night in line to buy it, shivering outside a specialty store. It had cost nearly half your savings at the time. You remembered the thrill of unboxing it, The satisfaction of placing it carefully into the case, the quiet ritual once a month for 3 years of dusting it gently with a soft brush, perfect, 18 centimeters tall, pure white finish, smooth as porcelain, 3 pairs of wings on its back, each feather carved with exquisite detail, able to spread into a glorious swan. The flaming holy sword in its hand was mirror-plated, catching light in shifting prismatic colors. Its face was handsome, merciful, eyes lowered, as if watching over all living things. It was not a weapon, it was art, a crown jewel of your collection, one of the few truly beautiful giants in your lonely world. You stood up. Your legs felt weak from the earlier impact and from the struggle inside your chest. Step by step, you walked to the display case. You opened it. Cold air mixed with the faint scent of plastic and paint flowed out, rising onto your toes. You carefully lifted the white box down. It felt light and unbearably heavy. You placed it on the only clean corner of your workbench, right beside the observation window, still reflecting Irich's final mobilization. Through the observation window, Sarah had finished his speech. The soldiers below were making their final checks, embracing one another, saying farewells. The tragic atmosphere nearly spilled through the glass. Your hand rested on the lid of the box. Your fingertips were cold, trembling slightly. If I don't return, please at least bring them home. They should not rot here. Sarah's earlier quiet plea echoed in your mind with painful clarity. Bring them home. Artoria's joints were already cracking wider. The mech had been reduced to wreckage. The plastic soldiers had melted in acid. The black iron golem could barely take 3 steps before stalling. They had already rotted there. And this angel, this flawless angel, you were about to send it into that hell, to face something whose very name sounded unutterable. Reason told you this was the single most powerful variable left. A collector's edition model once activated. Its intelligence and combat potential would far exceed Artoria and the plastic soldiers combined. But your emotions screamed. This was your collection. It was meant to stand here forever, perfect, untouched. Not to fight in a filthy world, not to be shattered, charred, or melted away. You looked at the serial number on the box. Then you looked through the observation window, at Sarah's silhouette, his hand resting briefly on the misspelled name etched into his chest armor. At the dwarven chieftain cradling the powered hammer you had sent, as if it were a child. At Lilith, carefully inspecting the crude flight wings, methodical, focused. You remembered the green plastic soldier standing in front of a child, shattering with a sharp crack. You remembered the mech lifting Sarah skyward, a shaft of dim yellow sunlight breaking through the clouds. You remembered Sarah turning away after deciphering the inscription on the relic you sent, his shoulders trembling. They treated you as hope, even if that hope came from a silent stranger who only ever threw toys into their world. They fought with what you gave them. They were moved by your misspelled words. They tried earnestly to understand the fragments of knowledge you carved into steel. And you Were you really just an observer hiding safely in a room grieving over your own toys? "I'm sorry," you said softly to the pure white box. Your voice was dry. "I'm sorry for sending you to a place like that." You took a deep breath. With what felt like every ounce of strength you had left, you lifted the lid. Inside the foam lining, the Archangel Michael lay in silence, wholly peaceful, as if merely asleep. You reached out. Your fingertip touched the cool surface of its wing. The texture was smooth, refined. You gently lifted it out, resting it in your palms. It was lighter than you expected, yet the weight of its perfection pressed heavily against your chest. You did not hesitate, turning with the angel in your hands. You walked toward the redwood box, toward the observation window reflecting the moment the final expedition began to move. The army flowed out of the city gates like a wounded yet resolute tide of steel. Silent, marching toward the ominous crimson glow on the far horizon. The exoskeleton reflected faint light under the dim sky. The dwarven chieftain hefted his powered hammer, shouting curses as he urged apprentices to push carts piled with strange machinery. Lilith and the remaining elves checked their flight wings one last time, faces pale, yet unwavering. You placed the angel figurine gently before the mirrored surface. "Help them," you whispered. Your voice was barely audible. "And this," then you let go. The instant the angel fell through the barrier, the image within the observation window twisted violently. The golden ripples were no longer soft waves, but erupted like a lake struck by a massive stone boiling, spreading outward in violent surges. The entire redwood box began to hum a deep, strained resonance, as if it could barely withstand the pressure. Your vision went black. A shrill, piercing scream filled your ears, sharp enough to feel like needles driving into your brain. You could not even groan. It was as if an invisible hammer had struck you head-on. Your body was hurled backward, slamming into the workbench behind you, sending unfinished tanks, flight wings, and explosive units scattering across the floor. Then silence. The world sank into darkness. Above the expeditionary force, there was no meteor, no whistling descent. The sky tore open, not clouds, the sky itself. A leaden, eternal ceiling of oppression was split apart as if by an unseen colossal beast, revealing a radiant Lifung of pure gold, vast, immaculate, carrying a sacred pressure beyond description. Holy light poured down from the breach, like a galaxy spilling at the edge of annihilation, instantly driving away the darkness and miasma for dozens of miles in every direction. At the core of that light stood a majestic figure with 6 wings. There was no fixed scale to his form. The moment the Archangel Michael descended, his very existence resisted the proportions and laws of this world. Within the light, his silhouette wavered, at times 100 Zen-meter colossus bridging earth and sky, at others a condensed, restrained figure some 30 meters tall. At last he stabilized in the latter form. Yet the sacred pressure remained. every living being below the expeditionary army, and the demons watching from afar felt it strike directly at the soul. His 6 wings unfurled completely, blotting out the sky. Each feather flowed with liquid gold. The flaming holy sword in his hand no longer merely reflected light. It burned with pure white Zen gold fire. The flame held no heat, yet every demon who beheld it felt instinctive terror and searing pain. Michael lowered his gaze. His merciful eyes swept across the land, across the stunned mortal soldiers below. Then a voice spoke, not aloud, but directly within the depths of every soul. An vast calm, absolute, evil shall be refined. It was not any language of Sura's world, yet every being understood its meaning at once. There was no chant, no gesture of spellcraft. The angel simply raised his left hand, palm facing downward, toward the corrupted black forest ahead, a place steeped in decay and demon taint. Pure light poured forth. Where the light reached, blackened trees burned like paper, turning silently into pale ash. The demon hunters and ghouls lurking within let out brief, strangled remnants of sound before dissolving completely, leaving not even a trace of corruption behind. Within a few breaths, the forest was cleansed into a vast expanse of scorched earth, faintly scented with holiness. A path, a purified road, to the throne of agony had been opened. For a moment, the expeditionary force stood in stunned silence. Then came an eruption far greater than the roar that once shook Irachi's plaza. This was no doubt now. An angel had descended. A miracle had manifested. Soldiers fell to their knees. Money wept. Money trembled. This was not fear of power, but instinctive awe before the revelation of something supremely just, supremely good, supremely beyond. Sarah planted his sword into the ground, staring up at the holy figure suspended in the sky. He saw the flawless face, the wings and blade that transcended mortal memory. This was not like the rough yet functional steel creations of Iron Rage. This was something else entirely. A creation of gods. He unconsciously pressed a hand against his chest plate, where the silent god's misspelled name was etched. Perhaps that God had sent his most precious possession. The dwarven chieftain's mouth hung open. Even curses abandoned him. This craftsmanship, this material, by the forge, this isn't forged. This is woods. Failed. A low elven chant, an ancient hymn of praise long lost. Tears slid down, tracing the notches along her ear and shoulder. The angel withdrew his hand. His wings folded slightly as his gaze shifted toward the horizon, where the dark crimson pillar of light still burned. He did not wait for orders. It was as if his purpose was already inscribed within him. He began to move forward, not swiftly, but steadily, as though guiding the mortals behind him, as though shielding them from what lay ahead. Holy light expanded from his form, creating a moving domain into which demons dared not step. The army rose, tears wiped away. weapons tightened in trembling hands. They followed that light onto the purified road, their steps firmer than ever before. The throne of agony, Ons, the most magnificent temple of the elven high court, now utterly twisted. Towering columns were wrapped in pulsating, vein-like crimson tendrils. The ground oozed thick, bubbling black fluid. The air was saturated with cloying rot and the endless chorus of countless souls screaming as one. At the far end of the hall, where a throne once stood, coiled an indescribable monstrosity, roughly 5 meters tall. Its body was stitched together from countless races, countless individuals, severed limbs, torsos, faces all writhing, multiplying, sloughing off. 7 heads crowned the mass like rotting petals. Human, elven, dwarfen, each face frozen in ultimate agony, mouths opening and closing to emit layered, indistinct shrieks. Its lower body merged with the throne itself, extruding massive tendrils pulsing with dark light, burrowing into the walls and floor, binding the creature to the land itself. When the angel's light reached the perimeter and began purging the demon guards, every eye upon the 7 heads turned at once. 7 voices overlapped, hoarse, chaotic, yet carrying a strange rhythm echoing directly inside every soul. Light, disgusting light. Another doll, a delicate doll. That collector who hides behind boxes, who dares only send toys. Why does he not come himself? Is he afraid to dirty his hands? Michael hovered in the air. Light and darkness met in a stark boundary across the hall. He did not respond. He merely raised the flaming holy sword. White gold fire surged, forcing back the suffocating gloom. The Lord reacted. A massive tendril lined with suckers and bone spurs erupted from the floor. Eyes opened along its length, rolling wildly, spewing corrupted darkness. The angel did not move. The sword traced a gentle arc. A blade of pure light flew forth. The tendril dissolved on contact, from the point of impact outward like frost under the sun. Dark energy vanished with it. No blood, only pale ash. Interesting, the layered voices murmured, surprised and hungry. Your light is pure. You would look exquisite in my collection. I will carve out your core, place it where all can see, and soak it in pain until it finally goes dark. More tendrils surged. Corrupted elves, gargoyles, twisted bone beasts rose like a black tide toward the angel and toward the expeditionary force, now reaching the outer plaza. Your master gave you a beautiful shell, the voices hissed, but not enough power. Is this all he could manage? For the first time, the angel spoke aloud. Not the vast soul voice, but through his sculpted lips, a low whisper, metallic, clear, somehow cutting through the battlefield to reach Sarah. He's tired, so now I'm going to hit you. Sarah's heart clenched. There was no divinity in that voice, no mercy, only a simple, awkward protectiveness, like a child defending an exhausted parent. Charge. Everything we have. Make an opening, Sarah screamed, leading the rush toward the throne. The exoskeleton screamed with him. The dwarven chieftain, eyes bloodshot, ordered the mech's power core to overload. Giants, move. Grab that leg and break it. The mech lurched forward, howling under impossible strain. Its broken arm wrapped around a limb of fused bodies and held. Now, detonate. The faded eagle emblem you had drawn on the mech's chest flared blinding white. Then boom, a detonation far beyond black powder. Every unstable energy source stuffed inside erupted at once. The shock wave and fire devoured the Lord's lower body. The leg was obliterated. Black ichor and flesh rained down. The Lord screamed down. The Lord screamed, 7 voices, true pain, true fury. Cracks split the throne itself. The dwarven chieftain was flung away, blood spraying, laughing even as he fell. The plastic soldiers made a decision. Without command, they ran, stiff, determined steps toward the torn, pulsing wound. Other soldiers held demons back at any cost. The 2 figures jumped into the boiling, fetid cavity. Seconds later, a dull explosion sounded from within. Plastic fragments and thicker black gore erupted outward. The Lord convulsed again. More heads screamed. The angel seized the moment. All light condensed. Wings folded. He became a comet of white gold brilliance, piercing through all obstruction, straight toward the core. A massive, pulsating black mass, a heart. In the name of light, refinement. The blade struck. Time froze. No explosion, only a nauseating hiss, like countless insects burning at once. White gold light spread like an infection, consuming, purifying, erasing. The heart shriveled. Tendrils withered. 7 heads screamed one last time. Then silence. They crumbled like weathered sand sculptures. The body collapsed into ash and dissolving residue. The crimson pillar flickered, shattered like glass. The sky, the eternal leaden sky, tore open. True daylight filtered down. They had won. Silence, then breathless sobs. Sarah knelt, using a broken sword for support. He stared at the light. Michael hovered above, light dim, wings broken. Burn marks revealed dull, partially melted plastic beneath. Fine cracks marred his perfect face. He turned, not to the survivors but upward, toward a place beyond the sky, toward you. His lips moved. Thank you, Father. The angel dissolved into warm golden motes, rising, vanishing, leaving nothing behind. 3 days later, you woke on the floor, head splitting, throat raw, the room in ruins. The redwood box stood quietly in the corner. The window showed sunlight, rebuilding, hope. You crawled closer. Something stood beside the window, the angel, returned. 18 centimeters tall, scarred, changed, infinite. You held him. He was no longer a perfect collectible. He had gone to hell. He had fought, and he came home. Sunlight touched his wings. Dark gold veins glimmered softly. You smiled and cried. Outside, 2 worlds continued, quietly, beautifully. You turned off the workbench light, left only the small night lamp. You knew the story in the box would go on. But now, you could finally sleep.